if there is this true myth, and if there is an accounting for the existence of story because of who God is, what does this mean for how we conduct ourselves, and what can we create off the back of it?
Well, hello, Nate Morgan Locke.
Hello, Glen Scrivener.
What is your middle name?
So I have two middle names. James Hamden.
Gosh, you've got 5 names then.
It's Nathan James Hamden Morgan Locke.
So posh, they named him 5 times.
Yeah. I mean, I added one of those myself.
Did you?
So Kat and I was Locke and she was Morgan. Then when we got married, we combined the two.
Okay.
Just for search engine optimization, really. I just thought plain old Nathan Locke just wouldn't get the hits.
And you thought no hyphen?
No hyphen. I was gunning for an exclamation mark after the Locke. I thought it could be like Oliver the musical.
Morgan question mark?
If you
Locke.
can add your own punctuation to your name, what would you add? That's
Gosh.
the question.
Yeah, it would be a question mark, wouldn't it? Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
Everything
Morgan
is up
Locke?
for grabs
Yeah.
with Glen Scrivener. Hey?
Glen Scrivener?
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's the Australian thing.
Hey, yeah, everything's got a question mark, eh? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you've been involved in youth work for 12, 15 years, all up. Why should we invest in youth work, do you reckon?
Well, I'm not sure I necessarily know that. I know that young people are people and that they need the gospel, and that culturally we have bracketed them out. And we're very good at stratifying culture and saying, well, this is 0s to 3s, 3s to 5s, 5s to 7s, 7s to 11s, 11 to 14s, 40 to 80s, university age. So we do that, and therefore we target it because of our thinking. And every one of those ages is just as valuable as any other in terms of doing it. There's anecdotal evidence as well about just the number of people who come to faith before the age of 18, which you could then use as an argument to say that's why we should have targeted youth ministry. I think from a very personal point of view, youth ministry is where I was able to develop my creative evangelistic gifts, because we were doing holiday clubs, youth and children's work, holiday clubs every year when I was at the All Souls Clubhouse around Easter time. And so we had the freedom to prepare the teaching and the theme and the activities and all that sort of stuff early on in ministry. Lots of responsibility and given, a lot of rope to hang ourselves on, if you like, but given those opportunities, which helped me to see connections between creative ideas or stories and the theology that I was learning at the same time. So, what ought to be done with these terrible teenagers or these pre-teens and their new issues that they have? That's probably, I might need to think more about that. But in terms of my own experience, it was, what does it look like to tell the gospel on a boat?
Yeah.
If you have a story about a boat,
right?
What's a gospel story about a boat? Or what's a story about a castle?
Yeah.
Medieval. Tell me a gospel story in the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages.
Dark
What
Ages? What are these Dark
that,
Ages, Nate? They weren't actually dark, as you'll find out in my upcoming book. But
So or we did one. Who's the King of the Jungle? And it was called Rainforest and REIGN and then we had there was one that was set in a newspaper office.
Okay.
Right, which you don't think, how are kids going to...
Yeah.
But, now we have loads of opportunities to explore the relationship between storytelling and theology and to say, how can you... Are you just going to do have a messianic figure who comes in after things have gone wrong and then dies to save the day, right?
Yes,
are you going to do that? You can do it a couple of times,
Yeah.
After a while, you start to actually, you lose some of the gospel because you're so fixated on one sort of side of
telling.
it. And creatively, it just becomes this formula, which is like, okay, so now we need
It's like Hollywood and the Marvel films.
It's like, okay.
Turn the Joseph Campbell crank and out it comes.
But we did but one option was to do, what if we had 5 different episodes in which one character enacts an aspect of the gospel. So some part of soteriology. So it might be, okay, let's do adoption. What would that look like in this context? Something to illustrate that. And so, that sort of stuff.
Which you wouldn't feel the freedom to do if it wasn't kids.
No, which is weird.
Isn't it? Yeah, really.
It's so bizarre that parents and adults will watch and read and listen to fiction all the time.
Yes.
And yet somehow, because it's like we creativity has an age limit on it. Then we might do a sort of themed student mission week, events week. We might do one of those.
Right. But once you graduate, it's like, leave that behind.
And yet we're all watching hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of TV shows and films. So
I was interviewing Andrew Wilson the other day, and he said, the best thing that ever happened to his preaching was that he was thrown in at the deep end with I think it was like the 7 to 11-year-olds. And he was told by the leader of the Sunday school, like, you have to illustrate every point that you make with a visual aid, and this is what you need to do. And Andrew Wilson continues to do that, as a preacher, to grown-ups as well. And he says it's absolutely the most. It was the biggest breakthrough he has had in terms of his preaching, but he was only forced to do it because somebody said, they're 7-year-olds, so they think visually. You're like, well, I think 47-year-olds
and
do
it's
too.
an interesting thing, because I think, maybe people are wired very, very differently from each other, but when you read a book or you listen to an audio book, or just someone tells you a story or an anecdote, you're forming a mental image of what that is like. And we have the abilities, and we can develop those gifts to tell people stories which capture their imaginations.
Right.
Where you've basically taken over their mind's eye, and you are showing them something. Now, you can make arguments about, how many different versions of Harry Potter do people have, and then you have the film, and then of course everyone's forced to think of Daniel Radcliffe, and that I think is a challenge. But with good storytelling, with good description, with vivid imagery, you can give people something they've actually constructed themselves, and which they will sort of own in a way. And so I've often done that in my preaching, is actually to develop completely fictional, so making them up and telling the congregation, I'm making this story up to illustrate this.
I haven't
sermon
stolen
point.
this from J.D. Greer.
This is not something that happened to me or something that my kids did. This is something that I'm saying to you, let's imagine there is a woman called Joanne. Right? And Joanne goes out for a walk one day, and what could happen to her? Well, this could happen to her, or that could happen, or she could meet this person, and then because of that, something else could happen. I've got a story for this, but it's not going anywhere. The point is,
I'm picturing her.
You only have to give people a little bit of information, and they start to develop that themselves. Now, if we're happy as preachers to draw from the fictional, the playbox of Disney or of Netflix, and say, hey, has anyone seen that show on Netflix? Remember that scene where this happens? Right. And then the people who've seen it imagine what it looked like on the screen. And the people who haven't seen it, then you have to describe it for them. So it didn't really happen. So why is other people's fiction okay,
Yeah.
But then we would never even dream of doing that. Now, we might
Right.
not feel, preachers might not feel they've got the ability to do that.
Yeah.
But in terms of stretching our ability to communicate and developing our ability to capture the imagination, that's something we should be trying to do.
Yeah, totally. Because, I mean, if you make up a story, you are tapping into the imaginative kind of realm of everybody in the audience. Whereas if you're just tapping into, have you seen that popular Netflix show?
Yeah.
You're tapping into
Yeah.
a subsection of that. And it's almost as though, okay, there's a popularity out there that I want to piggyback on.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're telling a story, there is an imaginative kind of force that like unites us all.
And what's brilliant is everyone who needs to be able to connect to this story is in the room listening to the story.
Yes.
I'm not asking you to remember something that you may or may not have engaged with in the past.
Yeah.
Right now,
Yep.
we're thinking about
Yep.
this particular scenario. And I think one of the challenges that we can face is people, when we talk about stretching people or making people pay attention when and work to listen to a sermon, right? We often think, well, that's taking notes. It's sort of being able to relay the points afterwards, and which can be valuable. But at the same time, if you have had to think it through, if you've had to imagine the situation, your brain is going to hold on to that in a way that it wouldn't do if it was it.
3 points beginning with P.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think there's something about our anthropology which means that we can be missing.
Doctrine of man, people. Doctrine of man. Yep.
Yeah. So we're missing out this part of our humanity, which has been divinely appointed to us, and we're not taking that captive for Christ. We're not using our opportunity to do it.
So that brings us to a couple of like CV points for Nate Morgan Locke, and one would be so you worked for Christianity Explored Ministries, and you wrote and presented Soul, which is sort of the Youth Christianity Explored thing, but then you also co-wrote and co-presented Life Explored. And it seems to me that your work there in terms of storytelling was really coming to the fore, you and Barry Cooper in particular. Tell for people who haven't seen the Life Explored videos, tell us what they are and what you were going for.
So those videos, those sessions have two videos in them. The first video is a narrative film, so a short film about some fictional situation. And then the second video is a sort of direct biblical exposition teaching of that. And I think what we wanted to do was to use stories to get people to approach a topic or an idea from a different perspective, in a sort of slightly indirect sort of way, to basically say, what if you just heard this? How would you react? What's your concern? What are you pleased about at the end of this story? What are you annoyed about? What has moved you through the story? It's stirred you in some particular way. And then to sort of ask, well, why might that be the case? What might be in you that's sort of responding in that way? And what might there be about the God of Scripture which brings about a sort of subversive fulfillment of that, or accounts for that in you, your thing. So those stories were, there's one in India, there's one in Japan, there's one set in space, there's one in sort of Californian suburb. There's a prospector looking for gold back in the 1849 gold rush or something. So there's all these different locations across the globe and time periods that we're tapping into. But in order to sort of give you something that might provoke some thinking, and bring out some kind of reaction. And I'm very, very pleased that I was able to be part of that. I loved doing it. Could we have done some of them better than others? Yes. Is that if I ever finished something and not thought that?
Yeah, right.
No.
Yeah.
But yeah, just really, really excited to be part of storytelling in that way and just using gifts.
Oh, again, a breath of fresh air, and telling it slant and getting people to think again. And in the last 4 years, you've gone to Philadelphia to study your Masters of Divinity with Westminster Theological Seminary. Why did you do that?
Well, because story isn't just something that I think about, though I obviously do, and it's not something I'm just interested in studying. It's actually it's an inescapable part of the way that I look at life.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2017, I thought I'm kind of running on fumes theologically a bit. I had some really good training in the first part of my ministry, but I just feel like I'm slightly just to repeat myself and to say, and I think this is the way that it is. And I'm not a sort of voracious reader, and I'm not going to sort of follow all the debates online about various systematic theological developments and things. So I thought, well, this is a good period of our lives when we could go and have a chapter, abroad, elsewhere. And so I thought, well, this is an adventure, and where else says Adventureland to me than the United States? And it's, it was a great place for us to live as a family, and then to come back and start a new one. But yeah, I suppose really it's just that I'm constantly thinking of life as a story which is sort of unfolding and that I'm a part of.
Yeah.
As well as the great meta-narrative of the gospel being the thing we're all part of.
Yeah.
And so my own experience of life is in this thing that seems quite like a story, seems narrative.
Yeah. And you found a little niche for yourself, a very little niche, called a reformed mythologist.
Reformed mythologist.
What on earth is a reformed mythologist?
Well, so it was a joke from when I was with our dear friends Cooper and Carey, having words with them. And I talked about story and the genesis of story and all sorts of things about mythology and fairy tales and whatever with them. And then I just thought, if I was known as something, I think it'd be quite fun to be known as a reformed mythologist, because it's a nonsense. But it sounds like it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you've got these two words, reformed, which is related to theology, and then mythologist, which is no one's a mythologist. There aren't any other kinds of mythologists.
Yeah.
But it seemed like it could be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I then was, self-titled as Reformed Mythologist Nate Morgan Locke.
Yes.
And it seems to have been quite a hook for people. So I will often get, people referencing that back to me when it was literally just this sort of throwaway line.
Right. You need a better origin story, given what you are.
Yeah,
Seems
maybe.
like the reformed mythologist.
Yes.
One day you're walking through a canyon and you heard...
I tripped on a stone and I turned. But what I've found fascinating about that is, so I think this niche of being reformed mythologist, Nate Morgan Locke, it's actually really quite big, and I think growing. And now it may just be growing because I'm finding more and more that I can look at and go, oh, I can pull that into this new topic that I've invented. Or it could be because there are lots of other people who are approaching ideas and questions in the same sort of way, looking at theology and culture and the human condition in this way. So I think, that there's a cultural exegesis part, right?
Right. Okay.
Which there are loads and loads of people are doing that, right?
Mhm.
You find a film, you find a TV show, you find an artifact in the culture, and you say, okay, let's look at this. Is it telling a story? And how is that story fulfilled or subverted in the gospel, right? So that's a thing that loads of youth workers have been doing for a long time as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you've got this other piece, which is like, well, what's the systematics behind it, right? Why do we have stories? What is it that gives an accurate account of the existence of stories? The evolutionary biologists, they've got their view. Oh, it's all strategic. It's just an evolutionary
Helps you get a girlfriend.
advantage, right? Yeah, you know, yeah.
Tell a story, get a girlfriend.
That's the answer for basically everything.
That's basic.
But yeah, if they've got their view, but does that actually make sense?
Yeah.
Does that hold up within what they're letting account? Then you've got this thing of comparative mythology. And so you mentioned Joseph Campbell. And so you've got this hero's journey. You've got the Jungian archetypes. You've got all the stuff that Jordan Peterson, has sort of talked about in terms of the world being not a place of things, but a place for action.
Right.
And so it's like, how do we deal with ourselves, finding ourselves in this world of action where there are things that you can do and meaning? So that, I think, I can include in this.
Yep.
Then you've got, the Lewis Tolkien Chesterton stuff, which they've written so brilliantly and hilariously on this sort of stuff, where I think that's worth looking at. But then, not only that, Glenn, not only surveying what has been laid out there
There's
for
more?
us, but what about this as an entry point into the creation of stories themselves?
Okay.
So the inspirational side of it. What does it mean?
Yeah.
If this is all true, if there is this true myth, and if there is an accounting for the existence of story because of who God is, what does this mean for how we conduct ourselves and what can we create off the back of it? Which is a totally different thing from saying, hey, here's what I think of Toy Story 4.
Yep.
Which is just to say, here's why the story doesn't work, or some people would argue it does, but they're wrong. So we'll leave it at that.
And the totally different thing is, well, how do you now go and write Toy Story 5? Is that the new thing?
There shouldn't be a Toy Story 5. I brought it up, but you carried it on.
Yeah. Okay, so but how do you write something new?
Yeah.
How
do you genuinely write something which, so a guy like Andrew Peterson, right?
Yep.
He's then, I have to admit, I haven't yet read these books that everyone's talked about, but how do you go out and create something which people can consume for entertainment and edification at some level, and it's going to raise questions, and how do we do that?
Education. The portmanteau.
I think there's something that's really creative about what we can do in that little weird.
Yeah. Well, it's not little. You've just described everything. Yes, everything basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but
it's all part of my interest area.
It's your sweet spot, and you're now here in Eastbourne with Speak Life, and we are about to welcome, we'll have 5 residential interns to come, and we'll have a couple of people who are sort of going to be coming to us for part of the time, and part of the time going to be zooming in, and then a whole bunch of other people. If you go to speaklifefoundry.com, you can come and join us for our week-long internship intensives, where you learn the craft of filmmaking. So yes, people can come to the Speak Life Foundry Unlocked, and we've got all sorts of things on Fridays. You looking forward to Fridays?
I think Friday is going to be my favorite day of the week over this next year. I think, the mornings are going to be great as we're sort of thinking about theology for life and mission, but then the afternoon, stories to win the world, it just gets me really excited. We're going to be able to dive into all of these different elements of, the work of the Reformed mythologist, and that, the origin of stories, the power of stories, the how we
shape of
write
stories,
them, the shapes and all that
what they do
stuff.
for us,
Yeah.
and come on, I can't believe we've gotten through so far without mentioning C.S. Lewis's "steal past the watchful dragons" thing. I don't even know where does that phrase come from?
So it's in an article he writes called "Why Fairy Stories May Say Best What's to Be Said."
Okay.
And so wrote it in the New York Times in the 1950s. And he says, why did I find it so hard to feel what I was told I ought to feel when I was told about the suffering of Christ?
Right.
So you've got to imagine the young C.S. Lewis in church, and he's being told, Jesus died for you, and you should feel,
yes, because he did grow up in Northern Ireland, so
you should feel this and this and this and this.
Yes.
And he says the obligation to feel can freeze feelings.
Yeah.
And I think that's very true. And I think from my own experience, someone sort of just it's too direct, right?
Mm.
So he said, supposing one took these things and stripped them of their Sunday school and stained glass associations and set them into fantasy land, could one not steal past those watchful dragons? Mm. So it's the idea that when it comes to new ways of thinking or new information, as a general rule, human beings are not, desperate to find out more. If it's something that we know is challenging, it is something that we will seize up and we will, be on our guard against. And so he says, if the story could steal past watchful dragons, it can come at something in maybe an indirect way or a slant way and open people out. The classic example of this would be when the prophet Nathan goes to speak to King David to confront him of his adultery and with Bathsheba and the death of Uriah. And he tells him a story about two men and in a town, one rich and poor. Now that story, which we'll go into that in great depth, maybe even looking at some Hebrew words.
Well, hello.
What's the point of the MDiv? We'll really look at that slowly, and we'll see just how the story works and how elements of the story only exist for the purpose of specifying to the point of distraction David to be able to invest in what's going on.
A little ewe lamb.
A
little. Yeah, just a little ewe lamb.
It's little, and it sleeps in
his arms
and drinks from his cup.
Wow.
You can't imagine a more sort of tender picture of man and beast in terms of the And so that's
just emotionalism, Nate. That should not be allowed.
Ripped out.
Yeah, isn't
and
that?
Then the
Well, I mean, what kind of feedback would you get if you sort of gave a sermon that was trying to tug at heartstrings to that degree? Like, people would think you were just being emotionalist and kind of
I think so.
Affected. You're being affected.
I think you could. I mean, Nathan. Nathan is not the only prophet who goes to a king to confront adultery, right? So you've got John the Baptist goes to Herod to confront him. That goes very differently. But John the Baptist's approach is the direct, bang, propositional truth. It is unlawful
Keep your head.
To have
Tell a story.
Come on, guys, let's not be foolish about this. So, but Nathan's thing is, I can go in, and what I will do effectively is to get you to convict yourself.
Yes.
When I flip it.
Yeah. My thing about like stories is like, if you're in an argument with somebody, then you try to take the high ground on them. Maybe it's a moral high ground, maybe it's an intellectual high ground, maybe it's in terms of the experts that you can muster on your side. You're taking the high ground. Whereas if you tell a story, you're taking all the ground. You're like, let me tell you this world.
Live in the world that I'm
going to, and I'm going to give you every detail of the world that you are now going to inhabit. So shut up and listen. Right? Like, people think that stories are like this little breadcrumb thing that's just like tickling them under the belly.
And that's funny because very occasionally, and I think you do this too sometimes when you're doing the love story stuff. You ask for sort of audience participation in the telling of the story, right? You ask for what it might be and what it might be. But what we know is that they can contribute some of the details, and they can feel an investment in that way, but it just doesn't work to put all the effort or all the impetus on the listener to come up with the story. They're like, no, I want you to. I actually
choose your own
want
adventure doesn't
you
work
to tell me what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What is the result of this decision that was made?
Yeah, and there are right ways and wrong ways for the story to unfold.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and there are things that everyone knows you can't do because you've just broken the rules that you set up.
Yeah.
So that's not going to work.
But
their outrage at the breaking of the rules is because they've already bought, as you say, this. We live in your world, the world you've just started to describe to me.
Yeah. Which is why the Reformed and the Mythologist really does belong together, because here is a worldview about the sovereignty of gods that says, yes, he is the author and you are but a character. So, what other kind of mythologist are you going to be? Yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we'll go into this, I think, on the Fridays as well. Do some stuff on Chesterton when he's writing in Orthodoxy. He talks about how stories can only be Christian, but his argument for it is to say that because Christianity insists on free will, so he says you have to have this possible perdition, possible danger.
Right.
The hero will not be eaten by the monster, but you need an edible hero.
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's like there's got to be the chance that he could be destroyed.
Have stakes. Yep.
And so I don't think it quite holds up what his argument is there, but it's absolutely essential that we see that the world that we live in has this possibilities are always before us.
Yes.
That there are choices which are being made which have implications.
Yes.
And then Lewis, to go back to him, when he's talking about story is the way in which you can hold together divine responsibility or sovereignty. Divine sovereignty and human responsibility.
Yeah.
So he says you can tell a story about a fulfilled prophecy. So if you think of the Oedipal myth, which is this, there's this prophecy which, however hard anyone tries to stop it happening, it's going to happen.
Yes.
And so Lewis sort of says how myth or story is the way in which we can see how that actually plays out. How both of these things can be true at the same time. Because it's it's the proper arena for seeing that sort of a dilemma.
Yeah, I was talking to Andrew Peterson the other day, and because I'm halfway through reading his books with my daughter, I didn't want to press into this too much because I thought there'd be too many plot spoilers. But he was telling me about the finale of his fourth book.
Yeah.
He had plotted it out so that it would unfold one way, and when he came to actually write it, he couldn't. The story would not unfold in that direction. Yeah. He had to take it in another direction, and I'm pretty sure from what he was saying, a certain character had to die. Right?
And that's again one of the things that is going to be great for us to look at is the nature of inspiration, is the relationship between authorial control and sovereignty.
Yeah.
And these characters that just seem to do their own thing, and you're not you're sort of chasing after them, trying to work out what's happening.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Why is that the way that everyone seems to experience it?
Especially because in the classical world, it does unfold according to fate. Yeah. And what necessarily happens is always the tragedy. There is not the good catastrophe. There's not the eucatastrophe in that Tolkien sense, which is why the tragedy, it's the Greek tragedians, right? Yeah. that we know about, and it's sort of comedy becomes a particularly Christian genre, because, well, I guess we now become prisoners of hope, to use that sort of Zechariah phrase. I love that phrase. We are now prisoners of hope, whereas we used to be, guys of despair. Yeah. Now, I guess because of the Christ story, I guess there better be a turn for the good. I guess there better be a and now you tell kids about the love story. What should happen now? Well, they should marry each other, and there should be a feast and a song. Yeah. Well, I guess we have to. That's the way these stories go now.
And yeah, and those challenges that people face in terms of, plotting something out. I'd written the last chapter of the final book way before I'd written anything else. And I'd sort of, plotted out how was it going to get there. But did you have that control? Did you find that these things came alive in your hands? Did you find that you were, working with material not quite your own?
Right.
In that sense.
Right.
So yeah,
Stephen King talks about asking his characters where they need to go now.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? All those characters are in your head, Stephen. Why don't you just ask yourself?
They could just do this.
Yeah,
and Barry Cooper used a phrase, the oughtness of endings. And there is something about and this is like it's like every 6 months some big TV show finishes or some big film franchise
disappointing
comes to
everybody.
An end, and everyone's just like, no, this wasn't the way it's supposed to be. And you think, well, why was it supposed to be?
Yeah.
What was it that
Who
was
do you
there?
think you are?
How dare you? And yeah, there's all of that going on. So yeah, these are things obviously we're going to talk about Friday afternoons. We're also going to be then looking at the skills to make particular kinds of content and Speak Life media production. And
right. Which is also something you're going to be helping us with. We just had a great kind of brainstorming session on what are we going to do about Harvest Festival coming up in September.
And I said, what did I say? I said we're going to do a series.
Yes. Okay.
Ceres.
And nobody gets this.
Nobody gets it because Ceres was the Roman goddess of the harvest.
Right.
Demeter is her Greek. But
yeah.
I thought it was the funniest joke. But of course, that's a little reformed mythologist joke.
Yeah. Keep things a bit more broad than just a little bit more broad than that, and we'll be doing fine.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about Harvest, thinking about a character who is just relentlessly positive and grateful, and what a transformative impact he would have on the world. So and that's just fun. Like I mean, I was trying to think at the end of our meeting, like, where did this idea come from? Like, I think it was probably you. You just probably said.
Well, yeah, I suppose what's interesting, the idea comes and then you sort of... And so the other title, I think this is in my Twitter bio, which is a Parallelomaniac.
Right.
So that I'm not using it in the strictest sense of the term, Parallelomaniac. But it basically means that and I think you are very similar-minded. You see the connections between things very quickly. And it's like part of a comic thing that you're saying this is a bit like that. And a lot of preaching and illustrating sermons is about that sort of thing. But very quickly you'll find yourself coming up with an idea, and then you think, hold on, sounds a bit like...
Right, yeah.
It sounds a bit like, Buddy the Elf, or it sounds a bit like Emmett Brakowski.
Yep.
This bizarrely positive, thankful, grateful character who is seemingly oblivious to the cynicism and the misery of everyone around them, but has this kind of powerful effect, this impact on the people by not just believing that everything has to be played in the minor key forever.
Right. A burst of sunshine in amidst all the dreary drabness. And so maybe a working title is Who Can I Thank? But so our big idea, someone who just has to thank everybody.
Yeah.
What a burst of sunshine that person would be. But just as an example of some of the content that we're going to be keeping churning out here at Speak Life. But we're very glad that you're here, Nate.
Well, I'm super excited.